Welcome to the Roundtable Perspective. I'm your host, Tom Roach. I'm joined today by my guest, Dr. Giovanni Aloi, who is a professor of art history and visual culture at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And he has a book that came out this year, 2025, I'm Not an Artist, Reclaiming Creativity in the Age of Infinite Content. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So I'm curious about your title here, Reclaiming Creativity. Why are we reclaiming it? What's that mean?
We're reclaiming it because I guess we lost sight of it for a number of reasons. And we have, I think over time, especially over the past 200 years, confused art and creativity. They have become the same in a sense, and they are different things.
Well, so when I hear reclaiming creativity, what it makes me think of is, and I think it's especially from teaching photography, is that people have an idea of what good art is, and then if they see themselves as artists, they're going out trying to reproduce it, rather than trying to be themselves and do something original. And I felt that my photography students had these picture postcard images of good photographs in their head, and they went out trying to reproduce them all the time, and I had to break them away from that and get them to do original things. Is that the direction you're going in here?
That's certainly part of the argument.
Yeah.
The idea that, in a sense, art history has conditioned artists to follow a specific pathway, to become successful in the way that the art history book celebrates. And it has also led artists to replicate approaches to methodologies, to procedures, but also to aesthetics. And that can sort of take us down a rabbit hole of a lack of originality in the age of infinite content, as I say, which is...
That's my second question now. What do you mean by infinite content?
Well, right now, we do live in unprecedented times in the sense that the avalanche of content that's being produced, also by AI at this point, but by artists that previously had no opportunity to exhibit their work on Instagram, on social media, different platforms. And I think there is an interesting question at the bottom of it all. Who is all this art for? How are we going to consume it and access it in a way that it's meaningful, that is not just dictated by the swipe of a thumb, and that it really enriches our lives? So that this infinite content is really, I think, the horizon that all the young artists are against. They're not just making art at the time when Picasso was making art, knowing that the resonance of his paintings would have a certain audience and a number of collectors that were definitely going to see the work and perhaps purchase it.
What an enviable position he was in.
Absolutely. It's like the Beatles for pop music,
for the first 3 years of their career,
And I think it's important for aspiring artists and young artists to understand that the people they admired had a very different journey through their creative growth that unfortunately is no longer available to them. What is available to them is something different, something that perhaps can be more powerful, but that can be altogether daunting and meaningless because of the avalanche of artworks that we are exposed to every day.
I think of Walter Benjamin too, the work of art in the age of reproduction, right? You're sort of reflecting that in your title a little bit, right?
Yes, there is some of it in the sense, of course, that the aura dissipates, right? The more we reproduce the work. And what does it mean when the work of so many artists is actually just existing in that arena of reproduction as an image on a social media platform or a website, or let's say that it mostly manifests itself that way. We're really entering a time, we've entered the time now for a while, of new modalities of encounters with artworks, and AI has just complicated everything altogether just over the past year and a half. So,
this argument's been made for years about the Mona Lisa. It's certainly a wonderful, significant painting. But until Walter Pater wrote about it, until it was stolen, until Picasso was accused of stealing it, right? It really didn't have the reputation that it has now. And now you see people going through the Louvre, and they're going with their phones, and they want to get in front of the Mona Lisa and take the picture and then walk on. And there's no appreciation for it as a work of art anymore. It's just because of all the reproduction, right? It's just become a symbol of something, right?
Yeah, and it's something people want to see,
Yeah.
but don't often know why they want to see it beyond ticking that box. And that's the flattening.
There's something about her smile, right?
Right, yeah, I'm sure there is.
Yeah.
But there is also, I think, even more interestingly, as you mentioned, it's when it was stolen, it was reproduced on newspapers so many times.
Yeah, that helped it a lot.
So the mechanical reproduction turned it into an icon, and hence the fascination, the aura of Mona Lisa. But the question really is, what do we do with that heritage now that all these works of art tend to inhabit that dimension, but not quite with the same focus? Because when Mona Lisa was stolen and appeared on newspapers, so many people looked at those front pages around the globe. But now it's so difficult for artists to find audiences that might go beyond a certain niche, a certain group that really closely follows your work. So in the book, I also argue that it's important to realign our scales as creative individuals and really think beyond the stereotypes of the past. And what do I see ahead for my career? What kind of artist do I want to become? Maybe there's something in the local sphere. Maybe there's something that's very valuable about encountering people in your community and building something together that replaces this sort of format of the icon myth that never dies.
I think of that. I'm from Joliet, Illinois, and there was an artist in Joliet. I think his name was Hobby, and he painted local scenes. And they were, he did watercolors and oils, I think. And while he was still alive, he was very well respected in the community. He was getting decent money for his paintings, and he passed away years ago. And it's really valuable if you can find one and buy it. But it's only valuable in Joliet, right? But we really appreciate him as maybe our landmark artist for what that's worth, right? And as a very amateur artist in that community, right? It would be unimaginably wonderful to have that reputation.
I think it's a great example because the art history book has distorted our expectations.
Yeah.
We know when we look at the Van Goghs, the Cézannes, the George O'Keeffes in the art history book, that's like 1 in 10 million.
Right.
And is that the sustainable model for a happy artistic career that our students and aspiring artists should be entertaining or should be pursuing? And the book questions that idea and proposes a number of fragmented, local focused realities because they might be more rewarding from a creative point of view than this very sort of mythological journeys to conquer something that in most cases proves itself to be impossible to conquer, and then ends up leaving behind a trail of destruction where people feel like they have failed.
Yeah, because they couldn't lay on their backs and paint the Sistine Chapel.
Exactly, and also because there's one thing the art history book doesn't tell us. There's actually many things that I take the art history book to task in my book.
Yeah.
First of all, the art history book is full of great works of art, but what made them appear in the art history book is the fact that those works specifically were collected by influential people.
Yes.
So from the collectors, they end up in museum collections. Art historians write about them in the book. But that doesn't mean that works of art that don't end up in the art history book are not worthwhile, that they're not valuable, or that they're not culturally meaningful. So the art history book presents us with a kind of capitalist, skewed version of art history that our students take sort of transparently as this is the best.
Now, just to clarify that, I mean, you're not saying that these great works of art are sort of randomly selected here, right? I mean, obviously, Michelangelo, Leonardo, they were great artists. They were ahead of, as far as we know, almost everyone else during their times. And we can probably say that, I think, about the Impressionists, about Picasso, right? But you're saying at the same time, right? There may be other people who we've overlooked, right?
Absolutely.
Because of circumstances. And if somebody's an artist today, the fact that they may or may not be
in the book.
world famous or get in the book at some point doesn't necessarily mean that what they're doing isn't worthwhile, right? And that they can't have a fulfilling experience as an artist, right?
Correct.
So and the nice thing about this that I really like is you're looking at this from the perspective of the artist.
Yes.
You're not worried about the collector here.
Correct.
You're not worried about the school that's teaching them. You're worried about the artist and what their experience is like and how they can guide themselves along a little more wisely.
You're right, and that's exactly why I wrote the book, because year after year, students, graduate students especially, would come back to me saying, hey, I'm in Chicago, can we go for a coffee? I want to know what's not working out. And I'm like, what's not working out? Tell me, what are you doing? And it appeared clear to me that all that wasn't working out was that their expectations were skewed by the art history book. It's like nobody ever said you're going to become established as an artist in the 5 years that follow graduation. Some artists wait 50 years, 60 years. And the question becomes, how will you support yourself and keep your creativity alive through that journey that it's very personal, very unpredictable, and that if you're not independently wealthy, that's the other thing the art history book doesn't like to acknowledge, is most likely one of the toughest things you will have to do.
A good example of that wealth issue is Van Gogh, because everybody talks about how poor he was, right? And he never sold a painting, but his brother had money, and when he was in the hospital, his brother was sending in the most expensive paints and canvases that he could find, and it had him just painting one after another.
And it gets even better because
he couldn't have afforded any of that when he was on his own, right?
Absolutely not. And actually it gets even better because the art history book makes a really botched job of who Van Gogh really was and how he became the iconic figure of today that we know today. So he was actually pretty erudite. He studied because he wanted to become a priest, so he could read Latin. But he also worked as an art dealer in London. So he knew the art market.
Well, he assisted an art dealer, right?
Yeah, well, his sister-in-law eventually is the only reason why he becomes famous after death is because she has a 1-year-old child. Her husband, Theo, dies of syphilis, and Vincent dies too. So she's alone with hundreds of paintings by her brother-in-law in the basement. And she says, oh, maybe I can try selling these. And just out of her own genius, she masterminds Van Gogh, the icon that we know today. And she starts developing a network of artists who appreciate the paintings, of collectors who wants to buy them, which eventually leads her to set up enormous exhibitions of Van Gogh's work, and also to translate the letters so that they can become the backbone of the mythology of Van Gogh. She really understood how the whole thing works. And I don't think we do a good job, first of all, at not telling our students that that's how you become an artist of that caliber. It's not just about your work. It's not just about your originality and talent. Those need to be there, but you need that network of support that will make you visible and desirable. And you have to engage with it. And it's really, that's the important part to teach.
And you'd have to give some credit to his brother, though, because he wouldn't have had him treating those things out like a factory if he didn't anticipate
absolutely.
The potential.
And also the letters, I think.
But she brought it to fruition.
She brought it to fruition, but the letters are also important, I think, in the sense that Vincent was always riffing off Theo in terms of like, what do you think of this? He would make like little sketches of the paintings he was working on in his letters. So again, the myth of the lone artist who struggles all their lives and suffers for their art has been created mostly in popular culture. When you look at the small print, the story is very different. And the art history book should really tell it like it is, because it does create this distortion that makes people's careers more
and there
difficult.
there are Toulouse-Lautrecs out there, right? But not that many, right?
But you see, they all depend on some dealer or somebody they knew in a certain network of usually either affluent people or influential people who will make the work visible to others. And that is my biggest recommendation to anyone who wants to be an artist at a certain professional level. There are many different professional levels that an artist can enjoy their creativity. But if you want a certain level of recognition that entails the gallery network, the museum network, the most important thing to do is to develop and nurture that network of art historians, collectors, gallery owners, dealers, who will see their work and understand why it matters. And the legwork is the hard part, not to give up when rejections come in, not to give up when it seems like things are not going right.
Well, and the key to just really enjoy doing it and be happy even if it never catches on, right?
Because if you enjoy your creative journey, failure in that sense that we intend as the end of the line never exists.
Yeah.
If you enjoy your creative journey, the journey is your success.
Yes. I had in another context, I had a student ask me the other day about, the key to getting published.
Right.
And I've been a writer my whole life, and I responded. I said, it's not about getting published. It's about having something to say.
Correct.
And and wanting to get your message out. The publishing comes naturally after you've done that, but you don't go about it saying I want to get published and then just look for something to write.
And I think that that's a really good advice.
Yeah.
And it's also what I try to do with the book is to rewire the desire.
Yeah.
The goal of the artist is not to one day be exhibited at the Art Institute of Chicago.
Right.
The goal of the artist should be to embark on this experience that it's creatively grounded and that enriches other people, yourself, perhaps even produces something good.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if one day you'll be at the Art Institute of Chicago or not, because many people who get there eventually might end up in storage for 60 years.
Right.
So the influence, the dream is hollow. It's not what really matters. It's, I think, the now, the present, the enjoyment of the reality of it.
Yeah. Well, let's just walk through this from a historical perspective a little bit, if we can. Well, you say in your book, and you talk about how our concept of the professional artist today starts historically somewhere where we wouldn't expect it. And tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I return all the way to China and the Song Dynasty, and how the literati were, of course, one of the early models of institutionalization of the artist, and how, of course, we find the same patriarchal matrix that then becomes important in the West. So only men were allowed to study the art of drawing. It's connected to literature and poetry. It's very sort of elitist in a number of ways.
And it seemed to me somewhat parallel with what we understand about studying martial arts.
Yes.
Having a master and working under that person and earning this belt and then earning this next belt. And
correct.
Yeah.
And we find in Italy and then in the rest of Europe that, in a sense, that model is reframed through an elevation of the artist, again, a form of elitism from the medieval craftsman that was anonymous and worked in a workshop as part of a group of artists.
Or a guild,
Yes, at a guild. We find the emergence of the artist star, especially with the publication of Vasari's The Lives in 1550. Vasari wrote biographies of artists, so immediately mythologizing. And he actually set the blueprint for the contemporary art world as well. So our fetishization of the artist as this mystical character who's able to disclose secrets that are forbidden to the common person is very much can be found in that matrix.
It wasn't totally ungrounded, though. I mean, they did study anatomy.
They did at the time, especially Leonardo, Michelangelo. They did.
You see all these drawings they've done
Yes.
showing every muscle in the body before
Absolutely.
they did a painting.
It wasn't ungrounded, but it was mystified very earlier on. And that mysticism of the artist star is what becomes more complicated and problematic during the 19th century because of Romanticism. Also, one thing that doesn't get, I think, remembered enough, especially, or we don't speak to enough to up-and-coming artists, is the economic system that supported those realities. You know, Leonardo spent his life traveling around Italy and then eventually France because he needed the support of kings and noble families. So money and art have always been together, and artists have always needed patronage, they've always needed support. But during the Romantic period, when we find a kind of like breaking free from the state, the church, and artists feel like they can paint and want to paint what they want.
Right, which literally is the story of the exhibit in Paris, right? With
Correct. The
first
Salon
Impressionists.
and
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
Impressionism.
yeah.
All that freedom comes at a cost. The cost of having to sell your work on a marketplace. In a marketplace that is cruel, that is competitive, that is unfair.
And not being able to get into the Louvre. Right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's a lot of study of how the role of the artist changed over time that has been done in art historical terms, but where the financial dimension of how these artists have supported themselves through time has not been foregrounded enough, because we still carry the stigma with us that money somehow dilutes the purity of art. But yet, artworks are expensive.
Yeah.
Artists want to be paid for their work.
Right.
And so why disentangle the two when the two are very much intimately entwined?
Just to go back to the Impressionists for a second.
Sure.
It seems to me from my readings that they really wanted the status of the other artists.
Yes.
Right? And that they were frustrated by the fact that they couldn't have that status. So is it true that even during that period, there was this model that people, even though these artists were doing things that were very different, they were still trying to fit into this model of the professional artist and the acceptance and all of that?
Well, you can argue, again, going back to your question from earlier, also in the book I look at shamanism and how shamans were special individuals within early cultures and communities, and because of their ability to perform and express themselves through drawings, they were very early artists. They were respected and they were valued above everybody else. So you can argue that there's a form of sort of egocentric sort of construction, a psychological construction that runs through the figure of the artist, and the desire to be socially accepted, elevated, and cherished is very prominent in different moments in the history of art. With the Impressionists, I think, those artists were really trying to pioneer new realities. And again, without Paul Durand-Ruel, who bankrolled their experimentations, we would have never had Monet, Mary Cassatt, Morisot. It's really, again, the art history book sort of whispers around the idea that, there were more than one important collectors who believed that Impressionism could one day make it, who paid the Impressionists to have the free time they needed in order to experiment with work that at the time didn't have a market. And I think it's important for young artists to hear that and understand that technically there has to be some form of support. Otherwise, your journey will be extremely complicated. And I see so many young artists giving up 5 years into their desire to become professional artists because it is incredibly hard to make it happen without some financial support.
Well, so then let's transition into early 20th century Picasso. How did the concept of the professional artist change?
Well, Picasso astutely understood the power of flirting, right? So he was talented, of course. Yes. He was very visionary in terms of how to push the artistic discourse forward. You remember earlier you mentioned how sometimes the art history of art book can create this sort of feedback loop where artists tend to repeat themselves. He was very aware of how he had to be at the forefront of artistic discourse.
Over and over again, he was at the forefront.
Exactly. So Cubism, groundbreaking. It was absolutely sensational, the way the image looked so edgy and broken up. But he also understood the importance of making friends with the right people and to make sure that he was liked enough and connected enough to place the work.
He was a celebrity. He hung out with other celebrities.
Where it needed to be, exactly. And that is really the message that I can't get tired to put on the map for young and aspiring artists. It's not going to happen because the work is great. It's not going to happen because you exhibit it once in an exhibition. It has a lot to do with how you're socially able to...
Where we're at right now, when I think of that, I think of Andy Warhol as someone who was more a master of that process than he was an artist.
Shameless in that respect.
Can I say that?
Yes, absolutely.
You're not going to scold me? Okay.
Well, let's say that he was talented in different ways.
Okay.
I like the fact that he came from a very humble background of immigrants, and that he really had the determination to make it on his own.
Yeah.
But I think perhaps he's the most honest of them all, you know, like he really recklessly pulls the cover off the
right.
machine and says,
Yeah.
well, this is what it is about.
Yeah.
And I can also show you that I can replicate the image because the idea is what matters and people will buy it. And people did. And I think there is something interesting about that honesty, you know, the idea
Yeah.
that ultimately paintings have been commodities all along. Of course, in our minds, they become metaphors, they become important cultural representations of different ideals and content that goes beyond the commodity.
Right.
But without that commodity status, it is not the object that we worship.
Yeah, the fact is that if I had my favorite Picasso, I would sell it and get the money, right?
Right.
Money's worth more to me than my appreciation for the artwork.
Correct.
Yeah.
And personally, there are so many artworks. I'm not a good news for any artist wanting me to collect their work because I actually don't collect a lot of art. A lot of art lives in my mind, and I'm happy with what it has done in my thinking, how it has changed the way I relate to the world. I don't need to own the original.
Right. That's all the time we have for our program. Thank you to Dr. Giovanni Aloi for joining me today on the Roundtable Perspective. I'm Tom Roach. I'll see you next time.